about $1.4 trillion in Australia invested in superannuation, and an increasing slice of the pie is being invested into self-managed super funds. 9 years ago, self-managed funds made up about 15% of the super pool. Today, they're closer to 35%, with a cool $450 billion being managed by individuals around Australia. Tonight we're going to be talking about the trend towards self-managed super funds, why it's happening, and about some of the policy issues impacting their operation. Andrea Slattery is the Chief Executive of the Self-Managed Super Fund Professionals Association of Australia and joins us in studio tonight.
Thank you very much, Tony. It's a pleasure to be here.
Great to see you. Now, let's start. Just describe how self-managed super funds work. You know, what's the bottom line?
Well, self-managed super funds are a trust vehicle as part of the superannuation system where you've got the opportunity of controlling what's happening by getting the amount of advice that you would like and investing where you would like. So you can have as little help or as much help as you want, but you're actually able to manage and make decisions about where the investments are, when you would like to sell or buy, and what actually happens. And you can actually work towards your savings and accumulation and then work towards your retirement. So you've got the ability to do what you're doing with everything else in your life.
How many self-managed super funds are there in Australia? It used to be pretty small numbers, but obviously just on the base figure of $450 billion, there's obviously a lot of punters out there doing it.
Well, there's about 480,000 funds, roughly a little over 900,000 trustees within them. Most self-managed funds have actually got 2 members to the fund, and they are growing. They're growing in the last 12 months about 3,000 net per month. They've been, for about the last 12 years, they've been growing at about 2.5. So there has been an increase in the last 12 months of those that have actually started up, but there's also been a decrease in those that are actually closing down.
Is there a profile of the type of person who's more likely to say, I want to manage my own funds?
Well, self-managed super funds have really been the realm of those that are self-employed.
Yes.
Also those that manage their own business, so they might be a small business or a medium business owner. Usually they are professionals, executives or managers. When they first... SMSFs have been around since the late 50s, actually, so they've been around quite a long time. They weren't called SMSFs then, and then when compulsory super came in the early 90s, they really were... They got a new focus. They got a new focus, and they really were where you had primary producers and small business and self-employed, and they've gradually over time, as more people have understood them and had the information, they've actually grown with the professionals that perhaps provide them with the advice, or other professionals and management and executives. Got a lot of blue-collar and white-collar workers within them, so you know, you find quite a lot of SMSFs with people who are in the resource sector and other areas. So they're really people that are actually interested in doing something or managing something or controlling part of what's going on.
Andrea, are younger people getting more interested in this sort of scheme?
Yes, they are. As the information is and advice is actually becoming more prevalent in the market around superannuation in general. I don't know, in the earlier days, 10, 15, 20 years ago, superannuation wasn't a word that was generally talked about, but now it's something that most people know about. A lot of people know where those 9 cents in the dollar go, or at least know that there's 9 cents in the dollar that are going out. And so what we found in the last couple of years is that there's been an 11% increase in those that are under 35 that opened SMSFs in the last 12 months, compared with a population statistic of only 5% that should have. So more and more people are looking at this option as a way to move forward. But there's also, it's interesting, because small businesses 10 years ago, there was only 500,000, a little over 500,000. Now there's 2.5 million. So there's a lot more people that are self-employed and in small business. So there's an area still of natural growth.
A lot of women also leaving medium and larger businesses and heading into small business,
Yes.
thinking, rather than hitting the glass ceiling, I'll start my own.
Yes, there is a lot of women that are starting their own small business, but this is also, SMSFs are an area where there's a gender balance, a gender equity balance. So in SMSFs there's 46% of women compared to 54%, so it's quite, the numbers are quite equitable, and a lot of women are also self-employed, or part of their life is spent moving into the professions or the management, and they're looking for these options as well.
Andrea, how well are individuals doing at managing their own superannuation?
It's generally considered through the statistics and through the various research reports that SMSFs are outperforming what I would classify as the APRA-regulated sector of the market, which is the larger pooled funds or the other sectors, because SMSFs account at the moment, as you mentioned, around about 1/3, and their fees are a bit lower, and the performance is generally considered to be a little bit better.
Industry funds have actually been going backwards to a degree over the last couple of years, and we should point out the fact is that, the stock market has obviously been a little sluggish over the last couple of years, and you look around the world and the situation in Europe, the situation in America, not thrilling. But I'm just wondering, why is it that industry funds haven't been perhaps doing as well as they had?
Well, the industry funds are generally invested within Australia, within infrastructure and equities, and they're also investing overseas. The interesting thing about the SMSFs is, because of the economies of scale, they're invested about 98% in Australian investments. So pretty much across the board, across the banking and the resource sector, generally in the equities and in properties. So they invest directly, and the industry funds in their pooled environment have actually, their fees are a little bit larger, and it's one of those things, they're performing reasonably well, but the SMSF sector just seems to be outperforming.
Industry funds are now offering products that are described almost as a bit like a self-managed fund.
Well, a self-managed fund by definition is where you're in a trust.
Yep.
You're a member who's a trustee and a trustee who's a member, and you're accountable to lodge a tax return. So if you're looking at the definition, calling anything an SMSF is misleading if you're referring to it in relation to something else, unless it is a separate trust. But I think what they're doing is looking at slightly more flexibility within the industry fund environment than they've had in the investment market before, and it's actually more like moving more towards like a retail fund, because a retail fund is slightly more flexible in the way in which you invest.
The federal government has actually wanted us to be a little more adventurous, hasn't it? It basically said, have a look at the investment, and you can actually change within even your industry fund. You can change the balance of what you're doing. Yes,
and I think that's a very progressive way, and the government has actually been encouraging all investment opportunities going forward. I know that some of the investments within the SMSF sector, because of there are barriers to entry because of the large entry points. So infrastructure trusts and things like the biotech industry, the entry points are $500 million, or definitely much higher than the average balance of an SMSF. And so some of those economies of scale haven't allowed SMSFs to invest in them, but the other sectors do invest, and then they start to make it a bit more flexible. But I think the more information people have and the more opportunity they have for investing, it allows investment within Australia, and it actually allows growth within those funds as well. Yeah.
If you need to SMS at any stage during the next 3.5 hours, you can on 0467 922 702. 0467 922 702. And as a matter of fact, Ben has already done that. He said, Tony, could you ask if a government fund is better than an industry fund for young workers at uni needing low fees but good return?
Well, a government fund, if you're in a government fund, there are certain criteria that actually apply. You usually have to be employed within that environment, and an industry fund is something that's either an award fund or it's actually something that a fund that you are invested in generally. To be able to move between those funds, it's really a good idea to get some advice on that, because a government fund has a range of benefits that may not be immediately visible to you if you don't understand what you're in. So underpinning all of this advice and underpinning all of the investment opportunities and what's actually happening is the concept of specialised or the appropriate advice. And at all times I would encourage Ben to go and get some advice about what he's in and the opportunity of what he's thinking of going in.
Because even if you are young, if you make the right decisions early, you obviously benefit a lot down the track.
Well, you do. There's a combination of not only benefiting, but of also having the right information to make the right decision, which actually gives you a better opportunity of knowing more and being able to be more in control of what you're doing going forward. So education and information is a very, very vital part of superannuation.
Ben was saying that in another text, this particular government fund is open to the public. I don't know exactly which one he's referring to, but...
No, but my answer would still be the same. He really needs advice on what he's in and what benefits are in there, because there are certain things about government funds that are different, and there may be something there. But also, if he's looking at another one, he really needs someone that knows what's actually going on.
What's what and who's paying. There's also a lot of paperwork and responsibility involved in self-managed super fund.
There is, and it can be as complex or as simple as you would like.
Yes.
And so I think it's really important that if you've got good, trusted advice. We've done a number of surveys, and so have others in the market.
So can you do it without an accountant, or you do need an accountant if you're running a self-managed super fund?
Well, there's a number of people that you actually need to give you some assistance. You need an auditor every year, for instance, and you need an actuary at certain stages in your life. If you don't lodge your own return, you need an accountant. If you don't draft your own deed, you need a lawyer. If you don't actually prepare your own investment strategy and those sorts of things, you may need somebody with a licensed advice capacity. So it actually is an area that can be very simple, depending on how you want it to be, or very complex. And the amount of compliance is really... it can be very easily worked with an outsourced arrangement, or it can be something that you might want to be more involved in which case that you can actually reduce the level of complexity or raise it depending on what you would like.
Are there rules to what you can and can't invest in?
Yes, there are. And those rules are actually part of the information that you should know before you go into an SMSF. Once again, part of a good advice piece, somebody can help you to understand those. It
is a fairly broad range, though, when you look at it, isn't it? It's everything from gold bars to artwork to, maybe an investment property.
Yes, it is. It's a very broad range. The investment rules are sitting within the superannuation legislation, and you're quite right. Within an SMSF, you can actually invest in what you were referring to as a collectible, and gold bullion is actually, or gold is actually an interesting one, because gold can be a cash tender, it can be a precious metal, or it can be a gold coin and a collectible. Each of those things have different rules, and each of those things require you to do certain things at certain times if you have them as an investment. So there are things that you need to know, and there are things that if you get the right specialist kind of advice can assist that to be less complex depending on your investment. But you may, for instance, invest in gold now, and then you may not need to worry about that for some time. So the SMSF investor is often more sticky, more long-term, and they don't necessarily they don't always trade regularly or buy regularly, and it depends on the way in which you want to manage your fund over time as well.
So in other words, if you'd bought the gold in the 80s and sort of were retiring this year, you'd have seen, quite an appreciation in it.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
So the Australian Securities and Investments Commission was saying only last week that the increase in self-managed super funds is attracting crime organisations to Australia. Now, the idea being that there are plenty of investors looking for someone to put their money where they're going to earn a big return. Is that a concern to the industry?
Well, I think the concept of crime in Australia and the aspect of crime infiltrating the financial services sector is a serious issue for the whole sector. We've actually done quite a lot of work with ASIC and with the Australian Crimes Commission, and we've also done a lot of work in relation to encouraging more powers to be given to ASIC and more powers to be given to the ATO in relation to regulation and picking up. ASIC now has or will have the capacity to pick up a potential crime before it occurs rather than afterwards. And Greg Madcraft is quite right in relation to any crime needs to be dealt with. But I think to single out the SMSF sector and its growth is perhaps a little bit more than that, because it's the whole of the financial services sector, the whole of superannuation that is at risk. It's not necessarily a particular sector, and I think we need to look at that from a more holistic point of view. And there's a lot of things happening at the moment that's actually removing the opportunity for crime to actually get involved. And there's new super stream rules that are coming in that actually allow an efficient transfer of the money electronically. And so there's not the risk now that there won't be the risk going forward that there could have been in the past for any superannuation crime.
I've got to say, we have heard about some notorious collapses such as Trio, which saw a number of individual investor funds wiped out, along with people who invested in Trio via industry funds. Are there lessons for self-managed super to learn from these collapses?
Absolutely. There's a lesson for everybody to learn about these. This was actually, the Trio collapse was actually something where the entire chain of the financial services system, the way it invested, how it actually behaved, where the money went offshore, the advice piece, every aspect was actually touched in a little way. And the lessons learned are that there are very many ways in which you need to get advice, and you should get trusted professional advice. And when you invest and the actual opportunities to get access to any kind of recompense, they're very similar in all the super systems, but there is one area that SMSFs do not have access to, and that's a Part 23 claim, which is where if the minister gets involved and he thinks it's actually in the best interest to have a repayment back, then only APRA regulated fund members may be able to do that. But that's not guaranteed, and this is the first time that it's ever happened where people have got 100% of their monies repaid.
The contribution age is something that I know you're a little bit concerned about. As I understand it, you can't contribute past 75.
Yes, there's a bit
even if you are working.
Well, there's a bit of an inequitable situation at the moment where if people are actually receiving a wage and they're paying their superannuation guarantee, they are able to do that past 75. But somebody who's actually self-employed or making voluntary payments and doesn't receive a wage, then they must stop at 75. And that's quite an inequitable arrangement when you've got the majority of people in an SMSF, possibly those that have been in service industries and are more likely to work past those certain ages. So we would love to see age limits and age barriers removed so that the situation is actually equitable across the market.
An interesting SMS from, actually email from Barry in the Northern Territory, and he said, look, I found a list of self-managed fund administrators on the net. My question is, are these businesses required to register with ASIC or any other authority to offer their services?
Administrators are actually they're in the wholesale environment, and a licensed advisor that must come under the ASIC regime is actually a retail advisor, and so administrators actually are not, don't have to come under the auspice of ASIC generally.
Anybody control them?
Administrators are actually set up the same as other institutional, wholesale institutional groups. They are an extension of accounting firms and those sorts of things. Accounting firms do administration services for SMSFs, but no, they're actually outside of the ASIC regime.
Barry was saying that their prices seem to be from a very wide range too. If you look at them online, there's a huge array of charges. Is there any control on that?
No. Within an SMSF, the environment within SMSFs are that there are people that can provide things for certain fees. The ATO has actually acknowledged that the average fee in 2010, which is the last actual year, was actually about $4,500 for an SMSF that year, and it had dropped down from about $6,000 2 years prior to that. So when you look at an average fee in an SMSF according to the statistics, it comes down to about 0.54% at the moment, with about 38% of those funds that actually have fees in the year just past of less than 0.25%. So when you're talking about those administration fees, you're really talking about market-driven forces and what they're offering and what services they're providing, what bells and whistles they're providing, what you need. Shop around. Good advice, once again, it underpins all of this. If you're comfortable and you've got a trusted administrator or a trusted advisor, then you'll actually be in a position where it's not going to be as much of an issue. What
about contribution caps? They've become a little bit of an issue. We do tend to, because of the markets, go through a bit of a boom and bust cycle. Self-managed fund holders encounter, obviously, sometimes the contribution cap is an issue.
Well, the contribution cap is an issue at the moment. We're getting mixed messages. The contribution cap is lowered across the board to $25,000. We've always been encouraged as a nation to believe that superannuation is our future savings vehicle and our future investment vehicle, and so we should be saving for retirement so that we relieve the pressure on the age pension and hopefully can actually live a retirement with dignity. And so to have the cap so low, it's actually restricting the ability for people to be able to put away and actually be able to manage the year in which they can put away and a general capacity to be able to save significantly.
So a lot of people really came to superannuation fairly late in their careers, particularly the baby boomers. It was really only in the 90s that a lot of people actually kick-started anything.
Yes. Well, a lot of those that are closer to retirement or in retirement have much lower balances than those that are perhaps 20 now and what they're going to have in the future when they retire. And so there really is an interest for both sides of government to actually treat superannuation as a bipartisan policy position. This should be something that is for Australians' future, and there should be a commitment towards allowing those with broken work patterns, women and those closer to retirement to be able to catch up and actually help to provide themselves with some kind of self-retirement.
Tonight we are talking about self-managed superannuation funds. As we said 9 years ago, they were about 15% of the market, which is a total of about $1.4 trillion. But these days, 35% are self-managed funds, looking at a cool $450 billion being managed by individuals around Australia. To assist us with looking at this issue tonight, Andrea Slattery, who's the Chief Executive of the Self-Managed Super Funds Professionals Association of Australia. And what I'm going to say is, would you like to ask a question. Maybe I haven't asked the question that you need to an answer to, or perhaps you've had an experience that you would like to talk about. We're talking about self-managed super tonight, or if you are thinking about maybe moving into that area, you might like to ask a question at all about how it's done. So that's the issue, and we'd love to hear from you.
Lines are now open. Call 1300 800 222.
Rockstar turned physicist Professor Brian Cox will be at the ABC Shop, Queen Victoria Building on Thursday the 8th of November at 12:30pm. And Michael Palin will be visiting Sydney to launch his new ABC TV series Brazil. He'll be at the ABC Shop QVB on Wednesday the 14th of November from 12:30 to sign copies of his book about Brazil. For more details, head to abc.net.au/shop.
Across Australia, it's Nightlife with Tony Delroy. It's Nightlife.
Talking tonight about self-managed super funds. Andrea Slattery from the Self-Managed Super Funds Professionals Association. Let's talk to a few people. Brian, good evening. You're asking, can an ordinary person be directing money into self-managed schemes?
Yes, thanks, Tony and Andrea. I'd like to ask if the 9% compulsory contributions that a person makes as an employee, can those contributions be directed into a self-managed scheme?
Yes, they can. There are two kinds of contributions that you can make. The superannuation guarantee, or the 9% currently, that's intended to go to 12%, is a contribution that can go into an SMSF, and there's also a member contribution, and that's something that you can put in if you're a self-employed. It is usually your total contribution, or you can put a member contribution in over and above your superannuation guarantee.
The simple word, Brian, yes, if you've got your 9 to 12% employer contribution, that can go into the fund.
And would the same apply to, say, if you had 15 or 17% into a public service super contribution?
So you're asking whether or not the super contribution
could be redirected into self-managed super.
Right. Once again, if you're in a government fund, you need to get advice about what benefits you've got in that government fund. But if you've got a government fund and an SMSF, yes, you can. In some instances, you might not be able to, but generally you're able to have choice and choose to put your SG into a super fund, into an SMSF if you wish. But once again, you need to get advice about that in relation to what you've got and where you'd like it to go. All
right, Brian, thanks for that. Ian, you have a self-managed fund, and you say that the fees aren't comparable to industry funds.
Yeah, that's what I've experienced. My self-managed fund, I'm 70 and it's about 300,000. Over the last 5 years it's made a loss, and the fees have averaged out about $7,000 a year. I've recently compared it to some industry funds which would work out about $2,000 a year, and the ones I've compared it to are actually making a profit. So I'm betwixt and between whether to close the self-managed fund down and change to an industry fund. But one of the investments went belly up and with the receiver, and while there's money outstanding, I can't close the self-managed fund down, I understand.
We have Graham Colley with us tonight, also from this umbrella group. Graham, do you have some advice on that? You've got a lot of experience in tax and superannuation.
Well, when you're looking at the costs of the funds, I mean, you really need to look at those investments that are underlying that fund. And, I mean, if you've gone into one where it is frozen, as we've found with some of those investments after the GFC, then it does cause a problem when you want to close down that fund, because you can't take the money out, and they won't certainly let you draw down that money. So you're left in a bit of a limbo land there with closing down the fund and probably moving that to an industry fund. But when you're looking at the costs there, don't forget that often behind some of these costs, while it might be $2,000, that might be what they're telling you, but you need to have a look at other hidden costs that might be in that fund as well.
Yeah, okay, I understand that, but I thought by reducing the costs I could negate some of the loss that I've been making.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, that's a possibility.
Ian, can you change your mix of, or are you completely locked in with this investment?
Well, no, I can change it, but I've left it in the hands of the fund that's actually managing it, because I don't want to be an expert on the stock market, so I put it in their hands.
Well, as Tony said, have a look at those underlying investments and get a report from them as to what you've got into.
Ian, unfortunately, it's been a fairly subdued time on the stock market up until about June of this year, and it's lifted about 14 or 15% locally in this financial year, but it had been fairly quiet up to that point, so maybe things will turn around for you.
Okay, thanks very much.
Thanks, Ian. Shane, you are asking, can a self-managed super fund borrow money?
Yeah, I was wondering if the fund could use the funds that are in the fund, the assets are in the fund as a deposit on, say, a mortgage for an investment property or something like that.
Yep, you can certainly borrow the superannuation money if you'd like to. Make a loan or get a loan from the bank, and then that money can be used to purchase an asset, and that investment needs to be held in a trust. And once the loan's paid off on that investment, it can be transferred back into the superannuation fund without any gearing behind it. There's a few things you need to think about with that, is whether it's a good investment for the superannuation fund to start with, the costs associated with going through with the borrowing arrangements, and you often find that may be up to about $10,000. So do the numbers on it and make sure it's a good investment.
Excellent. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Shane. Good to hear from you. Rob, you say, as a trustee of the self-managed super fund, you want to ask about also that aspect of borrowing.
Well, almost, Tony. I'm a trustee of a self-managed super fund. I want to enter into an arrangement with a builder whereby I buy a block of land owned by the builder, then enter into a construction contract with staged payments, but I don't need to make a borrowing to do it.
Okay, well, instalment arrangements that you would go ahead and purchase the property in that way is probably no different to many buy and construct sort of arrangements that are in place, where you're paying a number of instalments to purchase that property, and at the time it's finished, that is on settlement of that property, it then gets transferred over to the superannuation fund. So I can't see a problem with that, but again, you really need to go through and have a look at that contract to see at the time the superannuation fund actually acquires that investment.
So if I'm making staged payments, I would have thought that the super fund owns it from the outset. They buy the block of land as one transaction, and then enter into a construction contract with the deposit and the 5 stage payments.
Not necessarily, because what you're doing is you're buying that in instalments, and it's not seen as being a loan, because what you've got in the fund is the amount of money to purchase that property plus the building on it.
Yep.
And as you're paying that by instalments, if you have a look at what the tax office is saying on what constitutes a borrowing, an instalment arrangement generally doesn't fall into that category of being a borrowing or a lending by that superannuation fund.
I would just add to that that's quite an interesting area, and you really do need some specialised advice on that to assist you with making the right decisions, because if you put something together, it's very difficult to unwind and probably very costly. So I would recommend getting a specialised advice for that.
Thank you for that. That's the reason I'm ringing. My tax accountant says I can't. The ATO says I can verbally. I'm getting a ruling from them now. on that very issue.
Yes, that's quite sensible to get the ruling from the ATO because they do have a ruling on borrowings, and that talks in that ruling on what's meant by an instalment arrangement, which falls outside those borrowings. So if you fall within that part of the ruling, then it won't be regarded as being a borrowing.
Fantastic, thank you.
Thanks, Rob.
1300 800 222.
Lines are now open.
1300 800 222.
Evening, Ian. You would like to talk a little bit about the inequity about how long you can stay in a self-managed super fund.
Yeah, look, I'm doing deliveries. I'm hopping in and out of the car, and I just hopped back in, and there was something the lady was talking about, some inequity about people being able to stay in something longer than other people, and I missed.
Yeah.
So going over ground, you probably already have.
No, it's a fine question, Ian. Andrea, can you explain exactly what's going on with the inability of you to contribute after 75?
Just recently there's been a change to the law, Ian, in relation to somebody who is earning a wage and getting a superannuation, having the opportunity of having a superannuation guarantee payment made into super. That used to finish at a much younger age, but now it's unlimited while you're working. But if somebody is self-employed, as an example, they are not able to contribute, to make a member contribution past 75.
Even though they may have a job.
Even though they're working, they can't contribute past 75.
Look, so just another aspect of this was my in-laws had a self-managed fund, and they lost a lot with... there was something where there was... the self-managed people wrote off to get some sort of, I don't know, cover for it, but the people who were in the same investment but through AMP or something like that, they all got their money back. But there was the sort of the waggly finger from the powers that be saying, well, let that be a lesson to you self-managed fund people. So that's a bit of reticence I have there about, is there laws now that you must be in something. I mean, obviously these people didn't do it knowingly or whatever. They put it into the hands of people who they thought or trusted were doing what they, doing the right thing.
Fair enough. Graham?
Yeah, there are compensation schemes for APRA-based funds which the AMP fund would come under.
Yeah.
And it's possible for the minister in those cases to grant compensation, sometimes 100%, but often less than that. For those investments.
I saw a correspondence recently that sort of indicated that this fund had sort of written away to get the sort of coverage, and they're trying to dig up from 6, 7, 8 years ago or whoever. There's a lot of people involved in this, and they can't find the document to say that you got this sort of ruling or coverage or whatever. And the third thing about this is I've just had someone sort of ring me, solicited my business. I asked them where they got my number from, but sort of trying to talk me into it. And as I say, obviously my reticence, but, is it really something to look into? Or you just say, if you're going to be self-managed, you really have to start paying a lot more attention and committing a lot more time into it, or, in which case I'm feeling I may as well just stick with the one that works, fix it in my money into an account, and I'll just let them look after it.
Well, that's right, as I think Andrea pointed out. It's the additional responsibility you've got. I mean, you've got the freedom there in the control and the flexibility in the investments.
Yeah,
but again,
a lot more time.
But yeah, sometimes it can take a lot more time to run the fund, and I mean, some people enjoy that part of it.
Yeah.
I mean, if you don't find that is all that pleasurable, then give it to somebody else to look after for you.
Right, Ian. Thanks very much for the call. Kay, you actually started a self-managed super fund, and you say the advice that you were given was inaccurate, and you're a little bit foxed at the moment as to what to do.
Yeah, hi. About 3 years ago, my husband and I had the bright idea of starting a self-managed super fund to purchase an investment property. And we were quite upfront with the bank and our accountant about how much we had to put into the super fund, and it was $160,000, and we were encouraged to go ahead with it. And then we went to the bank to make the inquiry about getting the loan through the super fund to purchase the property, and were told that $160,000 isn't probably enough money, and we should never have started the super fund with such a low amount. Consequently, 3 years down the track, we've had our sort of dream of buying an investment property nipped in the bud. So our funds at the moment are in shares and cash, and over the last 3 years we've lost about $20,000. So I'm a bit miffed, to say the least, and now a bit reluctant to get advice from a bank or accountant, and probably would just need some guidance as to who to speak to.
Okay, well, getting advice from a bank or an accountant probably isn't a licensed advisor who may be able to advise on financial matters, and it's only licensed financial planners who are licensed with ASIC are able to give financial advice. And one of the things that's happened over the last few years is there's been a number of government inquiries into that, and to make sure that anyone that gives financial advice is properly qualified for it.
Yeah, but you imagine a bank would have some knowledge of what they were doing.
Well, I think it's the other thing is that SMSF specialised advice, it's out there. It might be worthwhile going to a source where you can find a specialist, and we could perhaps, if you leave your number, we can help you afterwards. But
that would be great.
It's one of those areas that it is a specialised area, and it's not a common area for somebody that isn't competent in complex advice. And so you really do need to find somebody that is competent and specialises in a range of areas. So that investment...
It's very hard to find that somebody, but everybody I talk to just seems to come across as not having the knowledge that we need, and of course I'm green at it myself, so I have no idea where to turn to.
Okay, Kate, just hang in the line. We'll get your number, and we'll get the guys to give you a call tomorrow and try and sort something for you. Can I thank my guest tonight, the self-managed super funds we were dealing with tonight, Andrea Slattery.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure.
Also joining in with some advice to Graham Colley, who's an expert in the area, has been in the business for 30-odd years. Graham, thanks for your expertise.
Thanks, Tony.
We have got